Hey all, this is Blake. I'm posting my second video for chapter 2 of Alan Combs' new book, Consciousness Explained Better. Um, I want to start off by just saying, I guess the intention of these discussions. Um, I've talked with Emily, and I think the plan is to relate these video addresses obviously to enlighten next teachings in ways that we can hopefully uh, contrast and compare them with the teachings. And so the plan, at least right now, is to read this book and, you know, within the larger context of evolutionary enlightenment. So on that note, I will read or kind of tell you my discussion, my kind of synopsis of chapter 2, and I guess how it relates to enlightenment teaching, enlightened next teaching. So basically, chapter 2 is titled "Never at Rest." It's an interesting title because it's kind of Combs looking into consciousness from the experience of thought and the experience of, you know, the subtle nature of the mind and how our awareness of these subtle objects um, are almost like a process of kind of in and out of um, content. So he quotes William James at the beginning, and he uses Whitehead as well. He kind of similarly goes through this chapter, much like chapter 1, going through the history of the development of consciousness explained in the Western tradition of philosophy. Um, he uses William James's metaphor of a flight of a bird, perching and flying. So he uses the bird basically is a description of how thought works, or how the mind, you know, goes from a place of content to a place of a connection to another thought, so that there's this kind of constant resting, perching, and this constant flight to a next thought or to a next perception. And so basically, he thinks he is discussing the fact that there's this process going on. And he relates this much to a river, um, and he also, or a stream, and he kind of he juxtaposes this position with the tradition of Descartes, of modernist philosophy, and then, you know, kind of mentions Berkeley, Hume, and ends his kind of critique from Daniel Dennett, and basically says that these philosophers look at the isolated thoughts, and he says that we can do this, but really the point he says here is that a bud or a drop of experience cannot be teased apart into threads of which is composed except by subsequent reflection. Each bud or pulse is a whole event complete in itself. So he's basically saying this another metaphor is he's using is a bud, and so that there's necessarily no isolated thought, but that they're um, fused with other thoughts. Um, he kind of relates this at the end to Buddhist concept, Buddhist phenomenological perspective of basically, I think, at least he kind of mentions it, he doesn't really discreetly say it, but the notion of dependent co-arising, which is a Buddhist concept of the mind, I believe. Um, so, which is interesting is that, you know, there isn't no independent arising, but that only that there is a dependent co-arising that exists. And so, basically, this chapter 2 is, I think, looking at his philosophy, process philosophy, and looking at consciousness from the experience of thought. And it's interesting to kind of relate this back to the E teachings, which, Andrew Cohen, I think, would take the position that, well, consciousness is a continuous process that he kind of spells out in this chapter, but that it's also that there is a certain experience, a ground experience of consciousness, which is, I guess, can be described as at rest, a place of no time and no space, but that is independent of those characteristics of the mind. Um, I guess just kind of understanding that perspective is interesting when we look at um, the way Combs kind of describes its more subtle nature of the mind. But anyway, that is my post for tonight. I look forward to talking to other people on this discussion, and yeah, talk soon. Okay, bye.